Our final speaker of today is Rafael Fuentes Tarin. He's a PhD student and postgraduate teaching assistant in the Department of Anthropology at UCL. He leads a research project on the Punjab 2022 elections for Ashoka University in India. He graduated with first-class honours in anthropology from the University of East London in 2012, completed a master's research in anthropological research methods at SOAS in 2016, where he specialized in ethnographic literature on South Asia. He's interested in different approaches to the notion of time in the social science, the anthropological study of politics, violence, and crime, and how timekeeping devices, particularly calendars, can be used as tools for political and economic domination, which actually makes me particularly interested in your work, because I like to think along similar lines when I look at ancient timekeeping. His current research is funded by LAP, which, for those of you who don't know, is a consortium in London which is itself funded by the AHRC, the Arts and Humanities Research Board. And his thesis is looking at the controversy engulfing Sikh communities in India after the implementation of a new solar calendar named Nanak Shahi. So, the title of today's talk is Calendars and Power, Unravelling the Political Economy of Sikh Timekeeping Practices in India.
Thank you. Thank you all. I hope they can hear me online. Thank you, Sacha. Thank you, everyone, for the wonderful presentations, and thank you, everyone else, for coming in and allowing me to share my research with you. The research is ongoing, and since I'm going to be talking about calendars, I thought I would bring in some calendars from India, so you can have a look, because I'll be talking about them. Look at them, just pass them around. Like, they have a lot of info, and you can get to see all the works. Just feel free to pass them around. Just, there you go. Oh, and this one. This one is actually really good. Doesn't like a catalog.
Okay, just cut it.
That one, yeah. I've been collecting them around. So yeah, so my research is about a change on calendars in Sikhism. So for those not familiar with the topic, I'm going to start with a brief introduction, and then I will take it on from them, and we will look at the polemic and like the main actors and like how I'm making sense of it all when I'm on the field. So Sikhism is a monotheistic religion based on the teachings of Guru Nanak. It originated in the 15th century Punjab, a region that was divided during partition between India and Pakistan. Perhaps a better way of looking at the region is by paying attention to its geographical features rather than the man-made borders. So Sikhs, back in the 15th century, they faced hostility from the Mughal rulers who controlled India at the time. They were guided by gurus in religious and political affairs. The last guru, Gobind Singh, established the Khalsa, or Community of the Pure. Baptized members must wear the 5 Ks as a symbol of allegiance. Kes, and cut hair, the Kanga, a wooden comb, the Kara, an iron bracelet, Kirpan, a sword, and Kachera, a particular underwear. After the disintegration of the Mughals, Maharaja Ranjit Singh established the first Sikh empire through swift military campaigns. However, his rule was short, and after the Anglo-Sikh Wars, the East India Company did not recognize Sikhs' independence. The British contemplated the possibility of creating Khalistan, or Land of the Pure, a Sikh nation, but after independence, the region was divided into Pakistani and Indian Punjab. So the Sikhs found themselves in India, a nation with little appetite for further divisions. In 1984, during Operation Blue Star, the Indian Army fought their way into the Golden Temple in Amritsar, where Bhindranwale, leader of the Khalistani movement, was resisting. After 1 week of armed struggle, he was killed. But shortly afterwards, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi was killed by her bodyguards in an act of retaliation. Anti-Sikh riots spread across the country. In the aftermath, in the 1990s, police targeted Sikh families across Punjab. More than 25,000 cases of torture were reported, and there's been a lack of official recognition towards these crimes. All this, in addition to the farmers' protests that paralyzed the country last year, has fueled a revival of the Khalistani movement. There has been 11 terrorist attacks since 1995, and more than 100,000 people have died at the hands of the Indian Army and the police forces. So it is within this context that the Nana Shahi calendar is introduced in 2003. In 2003, Sikhism's highest governing bodies, the Akal Takht and the SGPC, introduced the Nana Shahi calendar. The Akal Takht dictates the religious affairs and socio-political life of all Sikhs around the world. The SGPC is the body that regulates most of the gurdwaras, or places of worship. The calendar was designed by Paul Singh Porewal, a Sikh scholar living in Canada, and named after Guru Nanak, that as we saw was the founder. More importantly, the solar calendar that he devised replaced the lunar Vikrami, which is also used by Hindus. So, supporters of the move highlight how A, Nana Shahi invigorates Sikh identity. In fact, some of the most committed supporters are Khalistani organizations. And B, that it provides devotees with regular and predictable rhythms demanded by capitalist practices. Under the lunar Vikrami, the number of days in a year, the first day of each month, and religious holidays have to be constantly recalculated. The Nana Shahi fixed this by aligning religious practice to the Gregorian system. In the field, it's sometimes described as more rational and adequate for current times. No complicated calculations are necessary to predict festivals or arrange activities. Festivals take place always in the same date in relation to the Gregorian calendar. However, after all these good points, many devotees and Sikh organizations oppose the move and continue using lunar calculations to determine religious events. For them, the Vikrami calendar represents one of the few cultural elements that survive the politics of communalism in India. Festivals celebrated according to the Nana Shahi are embedded in Christians' linear time. They have lost somehow connection with nature's cyclical rhythms, and this affects how they see themselves in broader community context. So in 2010, this backlash, as well as the pressure from Hindu nationalists, who regard Sikhs as a Hindu sect, compelled the Akal Takht and the SGPC to incorporate lunar amendments into the Nana Shahi calendar. Those lunar calculations that were introduced, they were taken straight from the Vikrami. These amendments, created and abroad with radical outfits, they advocate for the creation of Khalistan. They hint at political gains for the Akal Takht and the SGPC as the real motive behind them. So today, a bitter controversy continues. Parallel calendars are employed in Sikhism. This generates confusion and social differentiation. In the last 5 years, Pakistan has denied visas to observe religious festivals in local shrines according to Vikrami dates. In addition, the same Gurpurs are festivals commemorating the lives of the Gurus, might be celebrated multiple times in a year, often with only a few days between occasions. So let's have a look at the calendar feature before we proceed further. The Vikrami calendar, also known as the Sima Hinee or indigenous months, is being used across South Asia for several centuries to manage agricultural tasks. In fact, even Muslim communities, they will use the Vikrami calendar for these purposes. It is regarded in Punjab as a source of ecological knowledge and related to movement of migratory birds and other natural phenomena. The Vikrami era signals the defeat of the Saka rulers, so it is 56.7 years ahead of the Gregorian calendar. So that means that today we are in the year 2078 of the Vikrami era. The calendar presents 12 synodic months, so it is 10 or 11 days shorter than what accounts for a solar year. To balance this, every 3 years, an extra month named Malma is added to the annual cycle. Therefore, depending on the year, Gurpurs might be celebrated 10 or 11 days earlier in a normal year, and sometimes 18 or 19 days later if it falls on Malma. In addition, the number of days in a month is not fixed and varies from 31 to 32 in summer and from 29 to 30 in winter. So devotees rely on almanac makers to predict dates. Its length does not correspond to any span of to the span of the tropical year, and as a result, months take place gradually in different seasons. On the other hand, the Nanasaki calendar is based on the length of the tropical year, 365 days, 5 hours, 48 minutes, and 45 seconds. Its first 5 months, Chet, Vasak, Yeth, Har, and Savan, contain 31 days, and the other 7, Vadon, Asu, Katak, Magar, Po, Maha, and Fagun, present 30 days instead. The birth of Guru Nanak in 1469 AD marks the beginning of the Nanasaki era. So that means that we are in the Nanasaki year 554. The Nanasaki presents a leap year rule, which consists in adding an extra day every 4 years to the last month, which is called Fagun. And to conclude, and this is the important point, the Nanasaki has fixed the dates of the Gurpurs to solar days of the Gregorian calendar. So what is driving this controversy? Why after almost 20 years, Sikhs can agree on which calendar to use? I believe that the controversy is sustained by an acute factionalism generated by democratic politics. Factionalism in Punjab is often described as endemic by conventional approaches. Sikh politics revolve around vertical groups of individuals joined together by their quest for power and common enemies. Disputes about women, wealth, and land are common. Factions lack a distinctive ideology. They are merely driven by a desire for power. Within this framework, Sikh communities used to live in passage to the Indian hinterlands. Traditionally, they arranged themselves into armed factions to expel invaders. For Pettigrew, the impossibility of establishing a central administration made factions the only recognizable form of social organization in Punjab. So that's the conventional approach of why we have so many factions within Punjab society. However, Martin in 2018 and 2019 believed instead that factionalism is generated by democratic power struggles between the SAD and the Congress, the two parties that have traditionally ruled Punjab since independence. Congress-led Operation Blue Star cemented this animosity, as we saw. The SAD has since made alliances with different parties, but never with the Congress. I want to say that the SAD is a Sikh pro-independence party. That's why after 1984, they negotiated with every other party in the country, but never with Congress, even when they've been in power. This rivalry generates a partisan distribution of the state resources that increases Sikh factionalism. Important figures in village councils are members of both parties. They compete for control of the council, and when not in power, they do anything to undermine its decisions. Leaders must demonstrate support to either the SAD or the Congress if they want to land favors and resources. It's been reported how the SAD facilitates distribution of heroin. Smugglers provide them with boat banks. They also distribute weapons among followers to confront Congress party workers who in some cases have been killed with impunity. So from within these two frameworks, I stick to the very last one. I don't believe that factionalism is endemic in Punjab. I believe that, at least in today's context, it's mostly driven by elections and by democratic practices, as I say. So when entering South Asia, democracy was embedded in local cultural practices and permeated Indian idioms of caste, kinship, and religion. This vernacularization of democracy reshaped in turn the political. So democracy should be understood as both the result and the generator of new sociocultural relations. In India, politics and culture are two sides of the same transformative process, rather than two distinct entities in interaction. In particular for religious nationalisms, for which defending one's culture is paramount. I witnessed this during the recent elections in Punjab. I was leading a research project for Ashoka University, such as for a local institution. The construction of the we, the Sikhs, depends on the coherence of building an antagonistic order. Organizations such as the Hindu nationalist Arya Samaj are perceived as a threat, and Sikh civilization portrayed under attack. Gurdwaras are centers of power and become vote banks during elections. This is by one of my participants. If a community only has one Gurdwara and other ones surrounding it 5, then they need to build 4. The committee will follow the calendar of other factions that suit them politically at the time, but that can be reversed afterwards. So as we saw this morning, the divisions were already there. The calendars only stress them. But why calendar from the many cultural tools at their disposal? Why do I believe that the study of calendars is relevant for today's academia? So calendars are cognitive objects through which we acquire information about time without having to resolve complicated calculations. It is certainly impressive how much information they contain. In the ones being passed around, almost 2 millennia of astronomical, meteorological, and astrological knowledge. Generally, people are unaware of calendrical logics, for example, the number of days in a lunar month, or the anachronism they present. The focus is on understanding the representations of time. They do not dwell on the mechanisms that underpin them. Calendars are everywhere, yet they hide in plain sight. They are cultural artifacts, and as such, they blend in the background and quickly become incorporated into our routines, shaping our behavior. Their legitimacy is taken for granted and their representations naturalized. Therefore, calendars are a powerful way of conveying cultural meanings, imposing rhythms in society, and regulating important events. As the work of Professor Stern highlights, calendars are inherently political. They were profoundly linked to the political endeavors of ancient societies. Control over the annual calendar in the Mediterranean or the Near East was understood as a political strategy. Those societies possessed the astronomical and mathematical knowledge to design fixed calendars long before the flexible ones were rejected. But flexibility to establish the length of months and years allow elites to regulate economic and religious practices to their needs, often to extend their rule. Through the Roman Empire, employing lunar calendars, such as the Gallic, the Jewish, and the Athenian, was a sign of rebellion. They became forms of subculture, expressing dissidence through lunar calculations. The Qumran community that we saw this morning, an aesthetic sect of Jews who live on the shores of the Dead Sea, used different calendars from the mainstream Judaism. The solar 364-day calendar depicted in the Dead Sea Scrolls differ from Jewish lunar calculations. As we saw, Talmud argue that the sect was actually formed because of this implementation, but everything indicates that the aesthetics had already severed ties with the Jewish community and employed the calendar to accentuate this split. Or the calendar controversy between Palestine and Babylonia in the 1921-92 AD was a struggle for legitimacy as part of a bigger dispute for political supremacy. It revolved around astronomical issues. A small detail in the calculation of the chart created a discrepancy of 2 days between the two calendars, but neither side attempted to solve it through scientific arguments. Instead, claims were about authority and tradition. In the same way, transition from the flexible Vikrami to a fixed Solan and Asahi obeys also to political purposes rather than astronomical knowledge. Sikhs had the knowledge to amend the Vikrami calculation many decades ago, and also though on tradition and legitimacy rather than using scientific arguments to resolve their quarrel. Those are pictures I take when I was on the field for you to see like when you go around markets, really everywhere. They're everywhere. People sometimes, they will stop lunch, didn't want to take pictures or film it, but they will stop and they pray to the calendars. So another reason for the use of calendars in the struggle is that they are everywhere in South Asia, as I was saying. From bazaar stands and small shops to urban slums and middle-class kitchens, You will encounter calendars in wealthy households and on bus journeys in your visit to India. Additionally, businesses use them as a form of publicity. Some, as I say, claim that they are only used by literate people in the countryside, while in fact they actually pray to them themselves. So the Sikh controversy draws on Swadeshi heterochronic tradition. Populations in the Indus Valley employ various calendars as early as the 2000 BC. They help regulation of Hindu practices in texts like the Rig Veda. Handwritten almanacs produced by Brahmins contain the calendar, astrological information, agricultural tips, and dates of religious festivals. However, no homogeneous calendar has been used in Swadeshi since these ancient times. Instead, the trend has been for people to employ different calendars according to their religious affiliation. So the Hijri calendar was introduced to Swadeshi along with Islamic doctrines in the 8th century. Mughal rulers adopted the Hijri as official calendar for administrative purposes, spreading its use among conquered populations. The East India Company replaced the Hijri calendar with the Gregorian system upon its arrival to the subcontinent. The British attempted to homogenize its domains under the Gregorian calendar, but Sikhs, Hindus, and Muslims continued relying on their own charts for religious and communal matters. Back at that time, Sikhs and Hindus, they used both the Vikrami, but they didn't embrace the Gregorian. In post-colonial India, calendars were among the first things to be printed and provided a sense of self-identity and time. They overshadowed the influence of the press in developing nationalisms among vernacular speakers. Nonetheless, in India, calendars did not contribute to a singular national identity, but towards formulation of different religions and communal ones. This, I believe, makes them an ideal analytical tool to analyze identity formation. The analysis of calendrical changes also provides anthropologists with an opportunity to study social change. Since all human activities occur in time, any social system requires the means to manage it. Populations present different timekeeping practices that allow them to meet specific political and economic needs. Therefore, if a calendar does not fit its purposes, it is quickly abandoned. But in addition to this functionalist interpretation, the calendar provides rhythmic form to time and fuses with bodies through periodic repetitions. It generates social rhythms. Since it regulates social and individual activities, altering the calendar's features or introducing a new one, such as the Nanasahi, has repercussions in all realms of human experience. The examination of calendars in Punjab reveals historical processes and the political and economic circumstances of the local communities. Furthermore, it sheds light on individual response to social change. And social change brings us to the second big claim that the Nanasaki supporters made. Nanasaki provide them with regular and predictable features demanded by capitalist practices. The implementation of the Nanasaki responds to an acute industrialization and urbanization of Punjab in recent decades, impact of agriculture on natural resources, and the encroachment of communal lands by the elites since the Green Revolution compromised farming in the region. People commute daily to nearby cities to work in the booming construction sector as shopkeepers or in government jobs. Many move overseas permanently or for big parts of the year. They brought modern technologies and digital forms of communication to rural areas. As a result, individuals measure time in considerably smaller units than the seasonal cycles favored by local astronomy. The Vikrami calendar, as we saw, known as indigenous months, has been used in Swadeshi for centuries. But its use among the Sikhs in Punjab was already declining even before the Nanasahi was introduced. Rural Sikhs started using the Gregorian and the Nanasahi calendar as contact with the cities increased. So the social time in contemporary Punjab is dominated by capitalism time reckoning. Time is the measured value of objects and human labor, and is commoditized through credit relations and trading. In capitalist societies, time becomes a valuable resource that is not passed but spent and must be exactly measured. And at this point, I think that links us to the argument that we were having this morning about like why about fixed calendars? Why, I remember they asked about like, you know, why, how will arrange a contract if it's not fixed? In my head I was thinking already in this, like, I believe it has to do as well with capitalist way of living, this future oriented and the thrive to measure time precisely. So the Nanasahi provides Sikh communities with precise and standardized rhythms demanded by the market economy, which were lacked by a previous lunar calendar, which is more attuned to nature cycles. And within capitalist societies, institutions also create different models of time and disciplines that sometimes oppose each other. The hierarchical relationship between calendars generated by different religious, governmental, and financial institutions in the state produces inequality and fuels a constant conflict within the society. In Punjab, individuals are compelled to mediate between all these calendars, generated by different religious and financial bodies in their everyday lives. Nanasahi implementation has complicated things in an already profound heterochronic region. The Saka, the Gregorian, the Hiji, and the lunar Vikrami calendar were already in use before its implementation. So to summarize this long presentation, I believe that adopting a new calendar will allow Sikhs to articulate their uniqueness within the shifting social context of today's India. The controversy drags on given the acute factionalism of the Sikh community in Punjab and numerous cases of corruption and political violence. Introduction of the Nanasahi also respond to capitalism temporal demands, namely predictability and standardized rhythms. This presentation shows how calendars are cultural objects that shape behavior, allow for political maneuvers, and facilitate indexical analysis of identity formation and social change. And to conclude, Sikh rival factions have adopted different calendars to accentuate an already existing split. With regard to the seminar, the divisions were already there, not generated for using more than one temporal framework. It is also fair to say that transition from flexible Vikrami to the fixed Nanasahi obeys to political and economic issues rather than scientific reasons. Thank you.
Thank you, Rafael, for a very interesting presentation, which of course presents a different perspective from the historical one, in that you can actually go and do the field work and see things on the ground and ask questions you want to ask, as opposed to depending on pre-existing sources, which is what most historians have to do. And I think that your presentation really brings home the fact that time reckoning is fundamentally not a scientific pursuit, but it is a social one, a social and political, economic one, which I mean, this is what I have argued, and but I think that your study really demonstrates this, that it's not science that guides any decision that is made with regard to time reckoning, but it is social factors. I think this is a very important gain from this. And, you know, I am very intrigued by the fact that the Sikhs, on the one hand, are I mean, on the one hand, it's a nationalistic movement, which one would normally associate with traditionalism. And here, on the contrary, what the Sikhs are doing is adopting a new calendar, the Nakshai, which is more global, more capitalist, sort of outward-looking. So it's really interesting how their nationalist aspirations are supported by a global cultural.
Yeah.
A global cultural capital, one could call it. Well, I don't know if you want to comment anything further on this? Or,
yeah, definitely, because this is like another aspect that I'm planning to explore further, and it's the weight of the diaspora in all this. As I mentioned, the designer of the calendar is a Canadian Sikh, and like a lot of these Khalistani organizations receive funds and support from the diasporic movements. So people in the diaspora are really engaged into this. as well. So you have on that side, as you say, like a traditionalist movement, right? But and a calendar that is being supported from the diaspora, from diasporic groups that, in many cases, these families were forced after 1984 to leave the country. That's why they tend to be more radical than sometimes the ones that they live within the country, and they continue, like, you know, supporting Khalistani organizations, and in this case, the calendar. It received a massive support, and it was actually decided in the diaspora. So that blends into, this global economic and the outlook of the calendar, because if you think about it, and you live in Western societies, and you have a calendar like the Bikrami, it creates you and it gives you more problems for your everyday life, particularly when you need to book holidays, or like if you have different festivals that you don't know exactly when they are coming up. That in India is more understood, but like maybe you live like in Western countries, you know, it creates more tensions as well. So that, I believe, as well, it generates this push for like a new chart. Yes?
Yeah.
Thank you for your talk. You highlighted the impact of the diaspora on the adoption of new calendars. What was the position vis-à-vis the BJP? Because the BJP itself was also created in the diaspora.
Yes.
And it was funded by the diaspora. And to some extent is still influenced by the diaspora. So was there any tension, or were there any commonalities there?
Well, like most of the supporters of the BJP, they regard Sikhs as just a Hindu sect. That's what I said in the presentation. Like, and they were behind the amendments that were made in 2010. So for like Hindu radicals, like Sikhs, they are not a different religion. They're just a sect within Hinduism. So for them, the fact that they were abandoning the calendar, you know, they didn't like it at all. They fought against, and like they pressured like the Akaltak and the SGPC to actually incorporate amendments and continue celebrating the important festivals at the same time that the Hindus. I hope that answered your question, yeah?
Question from Nadia.
I have a question out of complete ignorance. Can you talk more about praying to the calendars?
Yes. So that happens every day. If you go around markets or bazaars, you know, you will see all these calendars. And what happens is like when the moment of the puja comes in, people just pray to them. And some of them, they even have, alongside the dates, like you saw, they will have prayings, you know, written as well on them. So people, they just pray to them, they make the puja. Because it has the image, most of them see, the ones I distributed, they have the images of their gods. So they are there and they just pray to it, yeah. Which make them like even more, for me as a researcher, it make them, you know, even like more interesting, because they become religious objects in themselves, yeah.
Yeah, Charles.
Got it. So there's a lot of issues going on in your presentation and in your research, which will last. I mean, you're just at the beginning of it, right? You've just gone out to India. Now you'll probably have another year, possibly, doing field research in India. So the calendar is a political issue. Which calendar you're going to have. And as you described in your talk, which I just want to kind of reiterate, make sure I got it, make sure, you know, it's probably for the benefit of the audience perhaps. The issues are manifold.
Yes.
There's colonialism, there's nationalism, there's communalism, there's capitalism, there's agrarianism, there's now the diaspora as well, which you're highlighting. So the calendar becomes a kind of positioning issue vis-a-vis whichever political arena you're in, and as these political arenas change and revolve in their valency. So, as you said at the very beginning, that the adaptation of the Nanak Shahi calendar by the Sikh community at large was possibly in response to the 1984 Amritsar Golden Temple
And the
India,
aftermath.
yeah,
That's right. Yeah.
debacle. And that thrust them into a position where they were adopting a calendar that looked a lot like the British calendar. So they could get, they could then draw fire from, anti-colonialists and decolonialists, post-colonialists, and so on. So with each move, with each political positioning, you open yourself to other attacks. So what I wanted to ask is, as you said, the how did you put it? The schisms or the fractures, the factions were already there. But which ones were already there?
Oh yeah, that's right.
So what faction? I imagine within the Sikh community, not everybody is a kind of Sikh nationalist in favor of
at all.
Khalistan, and furthermore, part of the Sikh community lives in cities, and part of the Sikh community lives on the countryside.
That's right.
So which factions were there?
No,
before?
it's really confusing, and as a researcher, it's giving me a lot of headaches. That's why I talk a lot about factionalism, because it's the main thing to understand Punjab society. Like, I read about it, but now that I'm there, I realize how important it is and how different from other parts of India, because other parts of India are more based on caste relations and it's more horizontal. Here we're talking about factions, where there are straight lines, when like people, even they belong to other castes that they are inferior, they will ally to whichever person is on the top against maybe the brother that is on the same caste, but we are talking about horizontally. So the functions, and they mutate all the time. And as I say in the extract that I took from the field, this guy was really clear about it. He was like, yeah, like we might just take this calendar, but like maybe in 3 years' time or in a few months, we just change afterwards. If it doesn't suit us, or we argue with these guys that we are in good terms now. So yeah, it's complicated to look at it on that way because a lot of things fit in it, and at the same time, there is no clear boundaries of who is who, as you say. It might change as well. So yeah, it's complicated to look sometimes.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Can I ask another one out of ignorance?
Of course, please.
If you adopt a calendar and then change it in 3 years' time, how do people celebrate their birthdays?
That's a good question. They will celebrate it, as you say, how happened with the Muslim in your communities, Jewish communities that you were talking about. They use the Gregorian for like, in the same way, like if they are not sure, or even if you look at some of the calendars, for example, this is like the amended, this is the amended Nanasahi, right? The 2010. See, it looks exactly like the Gregorian. It has the elements of the Nanasahi, but the Gregorian is really much embedded here, right? So like they might do that, or they will celebrate it twice, like some people told me on the field. They will be like, because this is one thing I haven't mentioned, but like I was talking to Sacha about it. The debate sometimes takes place on the elites. When you talk to everyday devotees, they don't even want to like get involved in it, or they tell me, oh, don't look at this, don't get involved in politics, because they understand that it's a political thing. They say like, no, why are you looking at this? We don't mind. If we have to come twice this week, we come twice to celebrate the Sengurpurs, right? So like everyday people try to get away from these things that are happening more among the elites as well, and like in another kind of realm. What happens as well, they came up with another thing. I found out that in Delhi, they were like, there are some neighborhoods in Delhi that what they do, the main Gurdwara, the big one, they will follow Nanasahi calendar, for example, right? And the other ones will be following Bikrami. And everyone celebrate because that gives the opportunity to the smaller places to have people on that day too. So they will get like people going to the main one, the official one, but then they say, okay, and then we go on that one. So you see how people are like navigating all this. It's what we're saying, and this is the topic of this seminar. Can people live with different time frames? Of course they can. And, I'm witnessing there, and if you think more about it, we do it in everyday basis. But yeah, on this particular thing, yeah, they do. They come in with these terms. Because they said, yeah, I need to come anyway, or I like to come into the Gurdwara, so I just come twice. I'm not going to get... Some other people, no, but some people, yeah, you find cases like that. They don't want to, or like they celebrate it in the big one and then in the small one within the same week. So there are ways about it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I guess this is the question of, yeah, of course people can live with more than one calendar, but then the next question is how do they exploit this, and how do they hierarchize, or how do they functionalize the use of one calendar over another, and there's a whole sort of myriad of questions which all this opens up.
For me as an anthropologist, it's really puzzling to see this, because when you look at rituals, time, when a ritual is made, the time is one of the main important things. It has to be done in the right place at the right time. So sometimes when I go and ask them and they don't pay attention to it, it creates tensions in me, it creates questions. I'm like, what do you mean it's not important? If you're celebrating a ritual, it has to be done on the right time. But like, you know, not everyone like have that issue, or they will do it twice. So it depends. Yes, exactly. They will say, yeah, they will say something like that sometimes.
Okay, any more questions? Anything that...
Yeah, I think there's one in the chat.
One in the chat? Okay. Yes, Andreas, absolutely. There is time for one other question, so I will read it out. Sorry, let me just... Shortly after Indian independence, Nehru proposed a calendar of unification for India, which was strongly against the Gregorian calendar and based on scientific principles. I was wondering how the Gregorian calendar is received today.
Oh, the Gregorian calendar is used everything. For everything, even as I was saying, even if you look at the Nanasahi itself, is embedded in the Gregorian calendar every day with the technology, what I was saying on the final part of the presentation, mobile phones, apps, that is all run on the Gregorian calendar, and people are fully aware of it and they employ it all the time, particularly for everyday tasks. For more religious matters, they will try to follow Nanasahi or the Bikrami, but yeah, like the Gregorian is pretty much used everywhere, yeah.
Okay, so we're talking about the right time for doing things. I think
Yeah.
this is the right time now to say thank you very much.
Thank you.
And,
Thank you very much.
we have on schedule time for concluding, what's called concluding remarks. Usually concluding remarks is holding a gun up at the speakers and saying, right, you deliver your paper within 4 months for the edited volume. You'll be relieved to know that we're not planning any edited volume for this workshop.
We have another coffee before concluding remarks.
Pardon?
We had another coffee order.
Ah, there is another.
There's any other business.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, the way I see it is that we could spend the next few minutes discussing general points arising from this workshop if anyone wants to raise them. Really it's an open discussion. There is no agenda here, as I said before. There's no, we don't have to go through any planning of anything. The purpose of this workshop was to generate an interesting conversation based on people's ongoing research, and I'm sure every one of the speakers have their own publication plans in due course. There's no pressure or need for us to do anything around this. I'm just very grateful for all the speakers for their contribution, for taking the time to prepare their talks and for attending the workshop. And I think, I mean, I've learned a lot from this workshop, and I hope others have too. But if anyone has any sort of general observation to make about what comes out of the discussions, there have been a lot of, how shall I put it, a lot of convergences between the different papers that were presented in the course of the day, you know, from antiquity through to the Middle Ages, early modern and contemporary society. It's sort of the same story being repeated in some ways, which is really, really quite fascinating. And I think it just shows how much there is to learn from conversations between historians of different periods and anthropologists, and basically we're all doing the same thing, except that the methodologies might be a bit different. Does anyone want to make any final comment? So it looks like no, so I think we're going to gradually wind up and make our way to coffee at the back of the room and finish off the day like that. So, well, a general concluding statement. I mean, time and social cohesion, yes, there is definitely a connection between time and social cohesion. I started off by saying that it's a myth. I still think it's a myth, but it's also not a myth in the sense that people believe that synchronization is essential sometimes or in some ways for social cohesion, and even if it's not true, but that is a belief that people hold and that they live by, so it certainly makes a difference to the experience of society, that society will go together with attempts to regulate time and synchronize time. So I think this is sort of the general framework that comes out of today's papers. We've had a lot of discussions about the political dimension, the political drives and motivations which lead to making decisions about how time is reckoned. We saw this in Russia under Peter the Great, and Rafael's talk also has demonstrated this very clearly. We've also seen how the multiplicity of time frames is actually a very normal phenomenon through history. And I dare say still today, in spite of all the globalism and the domination of the Gregorian calendar, competition of other calendars is extremely normal and widespread. So thank you very much to everyone.